By 1793, the Habsburg Empire stood like a gilded giant, powerful on maps, fragile in reality. Centuries of arranged marriages had stitched together kingdoms, crowns, and borders. But they had also stitched together something far darker, a bloodline stretched past nature's limits. And inside the quiet halls of the imperial palace, where the air smelled of incense and iron, an event unfolded that would expose the true cost of dynasty. The empress labored for hours, her cries echoing through corridors painted with saints and victories. When the child was finally delivered, the room froze. He did not cry. His chest fluttered with shallow breaths. The midwives exchanged desperate glances while the emperor demanded reassurance that no one could give. The newborn's skull curved at unnatural angles, his eyes struggled to focus, and the muscles in his tiny limbs moved as if fighting invisible currents. He was Ferdinand, future Emperor of Austria, and living proof that the Habsburg line had pushed its luck too far. What followed in the coming months was a quiet panic disguised as celebration. Official proclamations described the infant as robust, yet physicians were summoned at all hours. The child convulsed without warning. His head swelled until attendants were instructed not to lay him down too quickly. Ministers whispered that his constitution was delicate, while the empress prayed beside a cradle that rocked as if soothing a prince already drifting between worlds. All the while, Europe gazed at Vienna with suspicion. France had fallen to revolution, kings were being executed, and the Habsburg crown needed stability, something Ferdinand could not provide. As he grew older, the problem only deepened. His tutors reported that lessons dissolved into confusion. Simple tasks exhausted him. He stuttered, seized, and sometimes stared into corners as though listening to voices no one else could hear. Yet because he was the eldest surviving son, tradition demanded he remain heir. Ministers strategized ways to rule through him, to hide his disabilities behind polished ceremonies. But the truth was unmistakable. The empire that dominated Europe had produced a future emperor who could not tie his own shoes. When Ferdinand turned 10, his seizures intensified. During court events, attendants hid behind pillars, ready to catch him if he collapsed. His younger siblings were sharper, stronger, but useless. Dynastic law placed lineage above competence. And so, Europe's most powerful throne waited for a boy who could not speak clearly or command a room. The tragedy was not just Ferdinand's condition, it was the system that created him. For generations, the Habsburgs had married cousins to preserve power, land, and religion. Each union tightened the coil until biology finally snapped. By the time Ferdinand reached adolescence, the empire's future rested on a fragile mind wrapped in royal silk. And still, Vienna pretended everything was fine. Portraits painted him as confident and noble. Decrees were issued in his name. But behind palace doors, reality festered. An empire built on bloodlines had reached the end of its genetic rope. Ferdinand was not a failing heir, he was a warning. This is where the unraveling begins, not with war or rebellion, but with a birth that should have been a triumph and instead became a secret. A secret so deep that even foreign ambassadors recognized something was wrong, yet no one dared say it aloud. Because the truth threatened not just a throne, but the entire illusion holding an empire together. As he grew older, the problem only deepened. His tutors reported that lessons dissolved into confusion. Simple tasks exhausted him. During court events, attendants hid behind pillars, ready to catch him if he collapsed. By 1793, the Habsburg Empire stood like a gilded giant. By the time Ferdinand entered his teenage years, the empire around him had already begun preparing for a future it knew he could never fully carry. The palace became a machine built not to educate him, but to protect him from the outside world, from rumors, from expectations, and most tragically, from the truth of what he was becoming. His days were carefully crafted performances. Every moment was managed, supervised, softened, and arranged so that the heir to the Habsburg throne would appear, at least from a distance, capable of inheriting an empire. He woke late most mornings, often exhausted from convulsions that struck quietly in the night. Attendants lifted him gently from his bed, helping him stand as he blinked through the fog that lingered after each seizure. They dressed him layer by layer in fabrics embroidered with gold and the double-headed eagle, symbols of strength that contrasted painfully with the boy they adorned. Breakfast was always light; too heavy a meal could trigger an episode, and he was escorted to lessons that never lasted long. Tutors were instructed to keep expectations modest. They spoke slowly, repeated themselves often, and kept notes detailing which subjects caused him confusion, which words he stumbled on, which tasks left him trembling with effort. Most days, learning dissolved into frustration. Ferdinand tried harder than anyone truly understood, but his mind worked unpredictably. Some mornings he could recall dates, names, and treaties with startling clarity, as if a window had briefly opened in his memory. Other days he struggled with simple arithmetic or forgot conversations moments after they ended. His seizures remained the shadow constantly trailing him. They arrived without warning, a twitch of the fingers, a stutter in his breath, a blankness in his gaze. Tutors learned to step aside, and attendants rushed in to keep him from falling. After each episode, Ferdinand would stare at his hands, confused, afraid, and apologetic, as though the condition he was born with was somehow his fault. Despite this, the palace maintained the illusion of progress. Reports to the emperor praised his steady improvement, while diplomats were assured he was reserved but brilliant. Carefully prepared public appearances were staged to reinforce the lie. He was presented only during calm days, when his speech was clear and his steps steady. Audiences were kept short. If he began trembling or losing focus, ministers gracefully ended the event. Foreign ambassadors, though polite, were not blind. They returned home with subtle warnings. The Habsburg heir was fragile, sheltered, and unfit for the storms gathering across Europe. Inside the palace, the emperor grew increasingly torn. As a father, he felt helpless, watching his son struggle through basic tasks with the determination of someone fighting a lifelong battle. As a ruler, he understood the danger that loomed. Austria sat at the crossroads of Europe. Revolutions, nationalism, and war pressed in from every direction. The empire needed a leader with clarity, strength, and vision. And Ferdinand, through no fault of his own, could offer none of these things. Medical examinations grew more frequent as he approached adulthood. Doctors measured the swelling of his skull, charted the irregularities in his motor control, documented his stuttering, his seizures, his vacant spells. Wrote discreet warnings that his condition would worsen under pressure. Others suggested barbaric treatments: bleeding, purging, ice baths, electrical stimulators. None helped, none could help. Ferdinand was not sick. He was the product of a dynasty that had gambled too long with its own bloodline. Still, he found small joys within the cage built around him. He loved simple walks in the palace gardens, where attendants followed at a careful distance. He enjoyed music, particularly slow, steady compositions that soothed his anxiety. He fed birds and watched them gather at his feet with a gentleness that servants whispered was uncommon among princes raised in power. He memorized prayers, repeated them aloud before sleep, and clung to the kind presence of those who treated him not as an heir, but as a human being. In these quiet moments, he displayed a softness that made his fate even more tragic. But while Ferdinand tried to live his sheltered life in peace, the world outside continued to unravel. Napoleon's rise reshaped the continent. Borders shifted like sand, kings fell, revolutions brewed beneath every surface. And all the while, Austria's enemies whispered that the empire's future ruler could barely sign his own name. Vienna responded with more ceremony, more spectacle, more elaborate displays meant to mask the vulnerability within. But nothing could hide the truth forever. By the time Ferdinand reached his 20s, the court could no longer ignore reality. He could not lead armies. He could not negotiate treaties. He could not sit through council meetings without his attention drifting or his body betraying him. Ministers began quietly planning a system of guardianship, a council that would rule in his name while he served as the symbolic monarch. It was the only solution that preserved the dynasty's dignity. But it also transformed Ferdinand into something no child should ever be, a crown meant to be held, not worn. Whispers spread among high-ranking officials questions of whether the empire could risk placing such a fragile man on the throne, but tradition was unforgiving. The Habsburgs did not alter succession. They did not admit weakness. They did not betray their own blood, no matter the cost. And so the preparations began. The Tudors intensified their efforts, trying desperately to shape Ferdinand into something closer to an emperor. They taught him ceremonial phrases, practiced coronation steps, drilled him in responses he would need to recite in public. He tried his best, repeatedly apologizing when he forgot lines or grew overwhelmed. His sincerity made even his sternest instructors soften. Yet sincerity could not change the inevitable. Ministers watching from the shadows saw not a future leader, but a young man trapped in a body and mind that constantly failed him. They saw an empire marching toward a future with a ruler who could not rule. And they wondered, quietly, privately, if the dynasty's greatest strength had now become its fatal flaw. By the late 1820s, the truth had crystallized. Ferdinand would inherit the throne, but the throne would crush him. The empire would prop him up with all the force of tradition, ceremony, and political necessity. And behind that glittering mask, a boy who had spent his life fighting his own mind would be placed at the center of a storm he could never understand. Here, in this tension between duty and fragility, between illusion and reality, the tragedy of Ferdinand deepened, for he was not a failed prince. He was a child born into an empire that refused to admit its mistakes, even as those mistakes lived in the very blood of its rulers. And as he approached his coronation, the palace was forced to ask a question it feared more than any foreign enemy. What happens when the future of an empire rests on shoulders that cannot bear its weight? When Emperor Francis finally died in 1835, the weight of the Habsburg crown fell onto Ferdinand's trembling head with all the force of a destiny he had never been able to control. The coronation ceremony was magnificent gilded halls, endless rows of nobles, choirs filling the cathedral with thunderous hymns. But those who watched closely saw the truth written in every small gesture. They saw attendants subtly guiding the new emperor to his marks. They saw his hand tremble as he raised the sword of state. They saw the flicker of confusion in his eyes when the archbishop finished speaking as though he could not remember the next step. And behind all the splendor hung a single silent question. How long could this empire pretend? From the very first day of his reign, Ferdinand's limitations shaped the government around him. A council of archdukes, ministers, and advisors quietly took control, ruling in his name while keeping him protected behind layers of ceremony. Official documents bore his shaky signature, but decisions were made by others. His role became symbolic. A monarch performed like a ritual. He opened parliament. He blessed troops. He appeared on balconies for celebrations. But behind every appearance was a network of attendants ready to intervene if he faltered, ready to end the event if a seizure struck, ready at all times to guard the empire from seeing the man behind the crown. Ferdinand, unaware of the resentment building among ministers, lived caught between two worlds, one of royal luxury and one of constant fear. At night he prayed for clarity, for strength, for a body that did not betray him. During council meetings, he often drifted into moments of confusion. Sometimes he asked questions so innocent that the room fell silent. Other times he stared at documents as though they were written in a language he had never seen. The ministers, sworn to loyalty, exchanged tense glances. They knew they were not serving a ruler, they were managing him. Yet Ferdinand's reign was not defined only by his disabilities. Those who lived with him daily spoke of a kindness rare in royal courts. He remembered the names of servants. He insisted that palace leftovers be sent to the poor. During one palace tour, he paused a meeting simply to admire a child playing in the courtyard below, smiling in a way no emperor should smile when the empire was under strain. His gentleness was genuine, profound, and heartbreaking because everyone knew it could not save the monarchy he represented. Outside the palace walls, the world was shifting faster than Vienna could control. The 1830s and 1840s were decades of fire and fury across Europe. Revolutions erupted in France and Italy, hunger spread. Nationalism surged like a rising tide. And Austria, ancient, proud, and slow to change, found itself ruled by a man who could not guide it through the storm. Ministers argued endlessly, factions formed, and foreign diplomats quietly questioned whether the Habsburgs had finally exhausted their power. In 1848, the crisis exploded. The year of revolution swept across Europe like a shockwave. In Vienna, students marched in the streets, workers demanded rights, and soldiers refused orders. Crowds surrounded the palace, shouting for freedom, reforms, accountability, words that echoed like thunder inside Ferdinand's chambers. Advisors rushed to him, panicked, demanding decisions he could not comprehend. The empire needed strength, decisiveness, clarity, and Ferdinand, overwhelmed, whispered the words that sealed his fate. "I am the emperor. But I do not have the power to rule." It was not a political statement, it was a confession. A moment of devastating honesty from a man who had spent his entire life being protected from the truth. The council knew then that the charade was over. For the first time in the history of the dynasty, they advised the unthinkable: abdication. The empire could not survive while pretending its leader understood the world collapsing around him. Revolutions were spreading faster than armies could respond. Austria needed a new face, a new figure, a new symbol of hope, a young, sharp, decisive ruler. Ferdinand resisted at first, confused and frightened. Abdication meant admitting failure. It meant stepping away from the only identity he had ever known. But as the shouts of protest echoed through the city and ministers pleaded with him to save the empire, he relented. On December 2, 1848, with his hand trembling so violently that an attendant had to steady the paper, Ferdinand signed the document ending his reign. Each stroke of the pen carried the weight of generations. The crown passed to his nephew, the 18-year-old Franz Joseph, who would go on to rule for nearly 7 decades. And Ferdinand, no longer emperor, no longer the symbol of a dynasty's decline, left Vienna quietly, his departure overshadowed by the chaos of revolution. But something remarkable happened after he stepped down. Freed from the crushing expectations of power, Ferdinand's health improved. His seizures grew less frequent. His anxiety faded. He spent his days in the countryside, tending orchards, feeding chickens, collecting coins, and enjoying simple pleasures that had always been denied to him. Visitors described him as gentle, humorous, and surprisingly content. He played music. He read devotional books. He lived without fear for the first time in his life. History would later judge his reign, but not harshly. For Ferdinand had not failed his empire had failed him. He was born into a dynasty that believed power could be preserved through bloodline alone, a dynasty that ignored the warnings written in its own children, a dynasty that sacrificed the well-being of its heirs in the name of tradition. Ferdinand was not a failed emperor. He was the final, undeniable proof that even the greatest empires can collapse from within, not because of enemies, but because of the choices they make about their own future. He lived to the age of 82, outliving ministers, generals, and even the revolutionary leaders who once threatened his throne. And when he died, quietly and peacefully, he carried with him a truth history could no longer ignore. The Habsburg Empire did not fall because Ferdinand was weak. It fell because the dynasty that produced him valued purity over survival, tradition over humanity, and power over the very people who were meant to wield it. In the end, Ferdinand's life became the final chapter in a story centuries in the making, a story of ambition, arrogance, and the biological limits of monarchy. A story that reminds the world that even the mightiest empire can break. Not with a war, but with a birth.